Hi everybody, welcome to Module 11 of IAS 322. I'm Bill L. Smith, the Director of the Martin Institute Program in International Studies, and a colleague of Dr. Roafat Chows, your instructor here in IAS 322. He's invited me to give this guest lecture of sorts. I'm not sure you call it a guest lecture in an online environment. Maybe it's more like a tag team wrestling match where I've tagged in temporarily. He's over in the corner getting some refreshment while I deal with things, and he's going to tag back in shortly. My topic is agricultural food and consumption. We have a pretty interesting tie to this in the Martin Institute because of a benefactor or someone who was trained in the Martin Institute a long time ago and who went into a career in international agricultural diplomacy. I'll tell you a bit about him in a little bit. But the main point of this lecture isn't just about agricultural production or governance or food production or transference or governance, but about how it relates to the environment. So if you are very interested in this topic of agriculture, food, and consumption, find you want to know more, there's a class called Agriculture 401 taught by Bob Haggerty, which is International Agricultural Issues, and I'd recommend it to you for further study. So first off, I'd like to briefly review the four main agencies that are involved in the global governance of agriculture, food, and consumption. So a couple of them you probably could have guessed if you've paid attention to many things around the world. The first two will be logical to you: the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program. They do very different things. Let me give you a quote that some people are fond of, that in terms of the management of international food systems, agricultural systems, is widely rejected. So that is, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. That's widely rejected in most international food governance. And the reason is that sometimes people are starving to death. And you don't have the luxury of teaching them how to fish if they are so desperate for calories and nutrition that if you took the time to teach them to fish, they would die in the meantime, or they would have no capability of following on. So in international food governance and agricultural governance, there's an attempt both to institute long-term agricultural production and improvement, agricultural systems to be better developed. That's through the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. That's an original UN agency established in 1945. And then there's a separate thing called the World Food Program, which was designed to address food crises. When people are desperate for food, when systems have collapsed, when a political situation makes it impossible to deliver food, then or to have food production and trade, the food program can come in with aid and assistance. So that was established in 1961 on a temporary basis, became permanent in 1965, and it exists through today. In 1974, something called the World Food Congress was organized to discuss food-related issues. That was in response to ongoing systemic problems with food production in the Sahel. That's the area sort of south of the Sahara Desert in Africa. And there was decided that some places were more or less out of the agricultural exchange system. It was more on a local or a barter or a subsistence measure, and that there needed to be more attention paid to rural agriculture. So the International Fund for Agricultural Development was funded. That's also a UN agency established in 1977. Then you have the World Health Organization, which works on health in all its aspects. So that's established in 1948, but has a long-standing tradition of encouraging not just the consumption of food, but the healthy consumption of food, or the consumption of healthy food and healthy diets. So when we get to the latter part of this lecture, we're talking about consumption in particular. The World Health Organization will be the main arm of global governance, sort of. And I say sort of because they don't have a lot to do with actual development or delivery of food systems. They're more setting up guidelines and hoping that that those will be followed, as opposed to like the FAO, the WFP, or IFAD, which are on the ground doing food-related or agriculture-related projects. So I don't want to sort of mislead you into to think that the WHO is actually delivering food to people. So let's start though with the Food and Agriculture Organization. I know in Module 10 you had conversations through Rowe in his lecture about fisheries and water. But fisheries actually fall under the governance of the Food and Agriculture Organization because for many people in the world, this is essentially an agricultural crop, as forestry is, as some other natural resources are. So agriculture is one of the four parts that they work on, but there's other kinds of management that you would work on over the top. So on the one hand, they're most concerned with sustainable consumption and production of these resources. So that's where even though the concept comes far after 1945, the concept of sustainable development plays in largely here in the FAO. So that's where you kind of start to have a tie to environmental concerns. it's not just about the production of agriculture or the management of forests or fisheries, but about the sustainable use thereof. And if you're going to focus on sustainable usage, then you have to pay attention to environmental issues and environmental concerns. So the FAO actually has partnerships in 197 countries. So officially, there's 193 UN member states. There's 197 entities affiliated with the FAO. So there's some that are non-UN member states of the FAO. On the PDF version of this lecture, you can click through to the FAO country profiles. You can see all the different kinds of programs that they run. So their main things are going to help eliminate hunger. They're going to reduce rural poverty. They're going to improve systems. They're going to improve resilience. They're going to work on sustainability. And while doing so, they're focused heavily on gender and governance. Gender is one where they're trying to improve the lot of women in agrarian and agricultural societies. But governance is one that also relates into the environment because they're looking at the way that food systems are managed and where you can improve things in sort of a green chain of from production all the way to consumption, and improve the way that the food is produced, it's harvested, it's marketed, it's transported, it's consumed. So the FAO has a lot there. And you would be able to look through these country profiles, country by country. This image here on the right is from a Cambodian program. It's one of the things that they have ongoing there, where they're looking at policy process, the right to food, and gender. So the FAO is working on that stuff constantly. And so it's not a direct concern of the environment, if that makes sense. The environment is sort of a concern of the agricultural industry, and they'll try to do their best to maintain a relationship with the environment there, not to do too much with runoff, like to improve runoff, to be better at using pesticides and that sort of thing. But they're not looking, for example, to end large-scale agricultural production, because that would be detrimental to what they see as their mission, which is providing food and agricultural assistance. So related to them is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is also an agriculture-related organization. They're really interested in an adaptation to the changing climate, which is a little bit different than being concerned with climate change as a product of their initiatives, meaning they don't see that climate change comes a lot from smallholders involved in agriculture in rural areas. They do see that they're on the forefront of bearing the brunt of the impacts of climate change related to agriculture also, or impacting agriculture also. So they have, for example, this program, the ASAP program, the Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture program. They do believe that, again, this is forestry and fishery sectors, not just what you think of maybe as agriculture, a key role in tackling environmental degradation and climate change. But in this case, they would suggest that it's as important to manage the way that this impacts smallholders as smallholders impact these targets. They do believe, as does the FAO, that to feed the expanding global population, that they're going to have to double agricultural production by 2050. If you do that, then you are going to threaten the progress you might otherwise make in terms of making agricultural production more environmentally friendly. So both organizations, the FAO and the IFAD, are partners with a couple of big, interesting NGOs. One's called the Global Environment Facility. I know Doc Royal is going to talk about this in Module 12, about financing environmental organizations. The other is the Green Climate Fund. So these are two major funding agencies that look to actualize programs to help in a variety of sectors, many of which are related to agriculture. And then that means that these two agricultural organizations, the FAO and the IFAD, are involved in implementing. They're called executing agencies because they are sort of seen by these big funding agencies as capable and able to implement programs on the ground which will improve the environment. And so these then might not be things that the FAO or IFAD would do in and of themselves, but in partnering with the GEF and the Green Climate Fund to see what is needed, that they can be executing agencies to help improve it. So it ends up being that they are partners in paying attention to environmental governance through these two, and they've been much more concerted in their efforts since the partnerships with him. So it is important to have these sort of roles of, for, from, through to NGOs, big NGOs, to help with these things. So agriculture does have that link in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, into working there. in the environment. So the environment and food, does environment matter so much in the providing of food? And does it matter? So with agriculture, there is a role, there's a recognition both of the impact of climate change on agriculture and of agriculture on climate change. But as far as food goes, or the right for humans to food in terms of global governance, there's not too much where you would say, okay, they're prioritizing the environment. And the reason is that there is such a need to provide immediate food assistance that there often isn't time to pay attention to whether it's an environmentally appropriate mechanism or not. For example, the World Food Program at any given day has more than 5,000 trucks, big transport trucks, more than 20 big cargo ships, and 92 big planes filled with food aid on the go at any given day. That's a daily thing. On an annual basis, they feed 91.4 million people food aid, that with about 15 billion rations. So that'd be those 91 million people eating lots more than just once, right? It's aggregated over time, and they do it for a pretty low price point, about 31 cents per ration. And they have to move. They have to get that food in, and they don't have a lot of time in that case, they believe, to worry about environmental impacts, because the overriding factor of the people needing food is what drives them to be delivering that food. Related to that is something called the Food for Peace program. That's a product of the United States starting in 1954, which is interesting because it predates the World Food Program. There's an interesting role of the United States, particularly in providing the food aid. In a lot of international organizations, international relations, there's a reluctance of the U.S. to get involved. But in this case, the U.S. is at the fore through Franklin Delano Roosevelt, through Harry Truman, through Dwight Eisenhower, presidents getting involved. So they're not worried too much there. But when you talk about hunger, this is a chart developed by Oxfam, which is a big NGO that was originally organized to address famine. They will look at environmental impacts that lead to the lack of food for people, that then lead to the need for food aid. So they would tie that very much back. The World Food Program may be initially more concerned with just providing the food, and then they would say, no, but you need to provide the food because of these failures here. This link through to Oxfam will give you some interesting information on that. There's also something called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was done from 2000 to about 2005, which looks at system-wide impacts of certain decisions on food production that lead to maybe food shortages in other places. It's worth your time to look at. There's a series of well-written, brief documents, short books for different constituents that will tell you about what one decision means as it impacts other decisions. But as far as consumption goes, that's one where first you have a goal for zero hunger. So you're talking about consumption goals where you're trying to get people to eat more calories, than more people consuming more calories. And you have the World Health Organization trying to both work on obesity and a lack of calories at the same time, because you have these sort of divergent patterns happening in the world. But the question is, how does that tie back to the environment? So with the WHO's approach is that you need a completely healthy life to have full health. And so that could be your environmental health, it could be your personal health, it could be your diet, it could be a variety of things. And they see those as linked, but a lot of the things that they do in terms of different parts of the WHO don't always work in concert with the other, which makes it a little bit a problem. So they're working on more like on food safety, food security, and the providing of healthy diets, but not always in concert with their environmental health stuff. Though they are linked, they're not always interlocked to make sure they're a unique thing. So some work together, certainly as you work on the global goals, which I know you've been introduced to before, you're working on some environmental stuff alongside zero hunger, but and these are supposed to be interlinked very much there. That means that it's more common for IGOs to focus on environmental issues and agriculture than it is for environment and food or environment and consumption. I did want to leave you with an interesting way in which things can change into the future. So here's where we get to say go Vandals. And the reason we get to say go Vandals is because the University of Idaho and its particular extension office are part of a really impressive land-grant university system set up during the Civil War in the United States, where agricultural research, development, and the environment are taken into counties all across the United States, in individual states, It's an impressive thing, and it's something we're involved in terms of food, agriculture, consumption, and the